here with John Papola of Dad Saves America and other initiatives. Thanks for joining, John.
It's great to be here.
Can you please start by introducing yourself and your work to our audience?
Sure. So, as you said, my name is John Papola, and I am a TV guy. I started off in television in New York City, and over the past 13 years, 14 years, I've also been an entrepreneur. So I run an organization I founded called Emergent Order Foundation, which is really a nonprofit studio that's dedicated to telling heroic stories that embody what I think are classical virtues and helps our audience be moved to action, and move to action in support of, I think, making the world a better place, but specifically championing civilization and freedom and the things that I think sort of underpin human flourishing. And so those are the themes that sort of animate everything we do, and they get embodied in the work in a lot of different ways.
What inspires you to do that?
It has been different at different times, but since the birth of my son, who's now 19 and off to school in Europe, in Rome, my family and the future, has been the biggest animating force in my life. Becoming a dad was a transformational thing. It liberated me in a lot of ways from my sort of self-centered ego about career and wanting to be this or that. And it reanimated something that I think I was just always intellectually interested in, because I've always been sort of an arguer. So discourse and debate and grappling with big ideas and trying to understand, like, what does it mean? What does it mean to do the right thing? What is correct? What is right? What's truth? Those are things that have always animated me. And broadly speaking, I call myself a classical liberal, which is to say I believe in, American constitutional principles, individual sovereignty and liberty, justice that treats everyone equally under the law, and, markets, the powerful role business can play as a force for good, the importance of faith and family. So these are things that I think are part of what constitutes the good, the true, and the beautiful. And so that's what motivates me.
What's your vision that you hope to accomplish with your professional initiatives?
Well, I have a couple. So I have a super selfish one, which is that I really love the craft of making video. I have since I was in middle school. As when my dad got a video camera, I started making videos. And so I love the filmmaking, the video making process, and I obsess about quality. So most of the things you'd see coming from our organization, whether it's Dad Saves America or our sort of economics rap battles that soon to be rebranded as Radical Discourse, or our feature documentaries, they're very polished. They're very well made. Mm-hmm. The craftsmanship. I'm sort of an acolyte of Steve Jobs. He's one of my heroes. He cared about what the inside of the original Macintosh looked like. That's how obsessive he was about excellence. So that's, one element. And I think the other thing is I do like to be right. I want to pursue truth. I want to know that what I believe is actually the right thing, that it works, that it's real, that I'm not fooling myself with my own worldview or ideology. And so much of what we do and so much of what Dad Saves America is about trying to explore, like, what is true, what really helps motivate people, what works and doesn't work in our sort of, when we talk about policy, especially as it relates to, like, we as individuals and as Americans being able to thrive. People put a lot of ideas out there into the world, and some of them are functional, some of them work, some of them are not so functional and don't work. Some of them are, truth can sometimes be a little bit on a spectrum, or it can be kind of contingent on other circumstances, but it's never just entirely up for grabs. We have a different word for that. It's called opinion. So I think that pursuit of truth is a really central animating force.
Are you saying that my truth can't be different from your truth?
You can, well, we again, that's called opinion. The attempt to try to use truth, to shift truth to being something like experiential opinion perspective is it's just part of this broader postmodern thing that's happened in our society, and I think it's demonstrably false. And I think the kind of things that we talk about on our show around mental health collapse and around failure to launch for young people, and the sort of crisis of identity that's sort of sweeping, particularly younger people, like when you're unmoored, you don't end up happy, you don't end up flourishing, you end up floundering, and end up, you don't know what direction is up. And I don't think, if you want to chart a course, you've got to know what direction is up.
What are your intellectual influences, given that you're speaking about postmodernism and you seem to have a sense of relativism and its dangers?
So I'm very heavily influenced by the economic way of thinking, and specifically what's you don't hear this term that much anymore, but there's a set of economists that largely hailed out of Austria. They're called the Austrian School of Economics. So Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Karl Menger. I think they're absolute heroes of the 20th, and they had a vision for what it means to try to understand the world materially. They're not about, it's not, this isn't a question about metaphysics, like is there a God, or does the world have an underlying spiritual logic? That's a separate thing. But how does the world work materially? They, I think, more than anyone else, had a great handle on it and great ways of thinking about it. In fact, the name of our organization, Emergent Order, is a Austrian economics sort of Friedrich Hayek concept, and that it's the idea that it's essentially evolution. It's where we see complexity, there can be order, and that order is often the product of the individuals within it and their own individual actions. So we will use these terms like we decide. But what does that mean, we decide? Can a we actually decide? Can a group decide? And the answer, actually, it turns out, is no. Individuals decide. The individual mind is what makes a choice. The outcomes of groups are more complicated than that. They're an order that is emergent, and it emerges out of the rules of the decision. So we have this. I mean, let me give you an example that's very practical, because I can get super heady and go into like academic-y nonsense. If there's 10 of us out to dinner, or planning to go out to dinner, what does it mean that we decide where we're going to go eat? Especially if several people want to have a different food and go to a different restaurant. It isn't going to be the case, unless everyone is literally identical, that everyone will decide the same thing. So you'll have to somehow figure out where to go, given some people won't be super happy with the choice. So you can vote and say, well, majority wins. You can say, well, we need super majority, so 7 out of 10 have to be on the same page. You can sit there and bang it out until everybody agrees and it's unanimous. You can do a coin flip and just say, okay, well, or pull straws. The process of arriving at the we decided to go to Chipotle tonight is not the same thing as whether is me deciding where do I want to go as an individual. And it turns out that matters a lot. And like, it sounds almost esoteric, but everything about politics, everything about negotiating with other people, everything about working in groups is impacted by this understanding of the difference between I decide versus we decide. And the Austrians, like Hayek and Mises in particular, grappled with this in profound ways. And one of the outcomes of that is that they laid out at the level of pure theory that something like communism can't even work in theory. People will often say, oh, communism is good in theory, bad in practice. No, it's bad in theory. It can't work in theory, because there's no way to have a solution for everyone, or to have a decision-making process that takes into account the diversity of all people. So that is that matters a lot whenever we talk about how do we all get along. These forces come into play, And so with something like Dad Saves America, what I think about is, well, okay, given that we want our kids to thrive, I want them to understand the kind of choices they face. I want them to be grounded in some principles that will set them up to succeed and not be fooled by language in an era where language is weaponized. And I think the language around identity has been weaponized. The language around our history has been weaponized, and so I'm very sensitive to that kind of thing.
That's awesome, man. You know how I found you, and you maybe humored to hear. So I was looking on YouTube for anyone who had resources for teaching parents how to form their children in virtue, and I tried many different prompts, and out of everything I came up with, so I found maybe like a handful of different channels. Most of them were they had 10 subscribers and the video quality was really poor. And then I found you, John Papola, Dad Saves America, who actually had a big following. I think I see the YouTube silver trophy medal thing behind you, and you had very high quality videos. So that's how I discovered you. And then I looked at one of your documentaries about this deaf guy
Yes,
and,
Troy
and his
Kotzer.
father. Yes, yes, yes. That was awesome. I watched that with a group of young dads who are friends of mine, and we discussed it. And some people were tearing up. It was a very beautiful one. What is the name of that documentary again? It's really
It's
good.
called To My Father,
To my
and we
father.
produced it. And we produced it last year, and yeah, I mean that's a highlight of the past couple of years for us. The director Sean Scavolin was on our team, worked closely with me and my team on it, and I had Troy on the show on the podcast to talk about his experience. And so, for those that aren't familiar, Troy Kotzer won the Oscar for the movie Coda, and he's deaf. He was born deaf, and his personal story of his relationship with his father, who was a police chief out of Mesa, Arizona, is just very inspirational, and it's just packed with lessons about how to be resilient in the face of challenges that can be absolutely debilitating if you let them be, and on multiple levels. And I don't want to give it away, so your audience should definitely strongly recommend you check it out. It's available on YouTube for free. It's like 23 minutes, so it's not a crazy time investment. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, one of the beautiful images in that is when his dad would come home from work as a police officer, his sons would be able to hear the noise of his sons could hear the noise of the car, but he didn't have a way of communicating his presence to his deaf son Troy, so he would just
yeah,
flash the lights, and then he would be able to see, oh, dad's home. So just a nice image of how a good father communicates differently to each of his children to show his love and presence and concern. But speaking of resilience in the face of challenges, do you have any stories of challenges you've had to face and overcome to do what you're doing now?
yeah. Well, I think like a lot of Americans, the pandemic posed a big challenge. We had moved down here to Austin in 2011, and we started Emergent Order that year. And as we were heading into 2020, we had a staff of 14. We were working on this documentary about the way to raise with what's happened with Gen Z and my son's generation, and the concerns around it that I think are at the heart of a lot of what we do at Dad Saves America. It was actually essentially like a prototype for what became Dad Saves America, this documentary film. And then we were almost put out of business by the pandemic. I mean, 90% of our business went away with the lockdowns. We went from 14 people, maybe it was or 12 at the start of 2020 to just the three partners and two staff members, and then just one staff member. And I had some other things happen as part of that process that were very painful and difficult. And let's just say I have a second mortgage from legal bills.
Mm.
It's funny how you
Wow.
can totally win. You never win a lawsuit. Let me just put it to you that way. So even when you're entirely in the right and you completely win, you end up paying the bill in this country. And so uh, that was layered on top of all of that. And so it was a very, very difficult time. And but that summer is when I sort of took a step back and said, well, what do I have been forced to into having a lot of time on my hands right now to think about what to do next and how to survive this thing. And what, when you build a staff and a team, when that goes away, it's like a huge investment in the relationships and the knowledge and the
Mhm.
interactions. And it's like, well, I could shut this down. I could, I don't know, like, should I just become a freelance director? Like, what should I do? And I decided, and I talked to people that I trusted, and this organization, Emergent Order Foundation, a kind of successor, was born in that summer, and really, 1 year later, became operational, and I began raising money for it and again as a nonprofit. So we're supported by hundreds of donors that of different sizes and some individuals, some foundations, and I committed to these virtue oriented stories. Like, how can we inspire our kids to embrace their potential? How can we challenge the ideas that stand in the way of that, or that tell them that they are a victim of circumstance? And how can we have fun and make beautiful art along the way at every turn? And it did, the most likely outcome would have been total failure. So the fact that we've had any success, I'm deeply grateful for every day.
What is your greatest success or the thing that you're most proud of accomplishing?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's a singular one. As a project, probably my greatest success remains the series of rap videos that I made when I was still initially working at Spike TV. And this was, was pitting actually John Maynard Keynes, left of center economist, sort of father of the idea that deficit spending is good to get us out of a depression or a recession. Stimulus, he kind of invented that idea. Against Friedrich Hayek, sort of free market opponent. These were born in the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008. I made these things with an economist, Russ Roberts. He and I co-wrote them together, and then I produced and directed the videos. And they've just been used. They've been viewed on YouTube 8 and 5 million times, but a lot of those views are in classrooms, which is why they're now like 12 years old and still get 30,000 views a month, because they're just getting used by professors and high school teachers. I've met students from all around the world at conferences who've come up to me excited like some kind of celebrity, which is bizarre and funny, because they saw my rap videos in their class, and now they're an economist, and now they're showing their own students this video that inspired them to go into economics or to go into finance or to change the way they think about the world. And so to this day, they're the most high impact things I've ever done. But more recently, with our Dad Saves America work, I've met parents who've changed schools for their kids on the basis of our videos about education and reimagining education. So that's, to change any person's life like that is such a blessing and so humbling that it just animates everything else we do. So I'm always thinking, how can I create value for other people? How can I be doing something that enriches your life as a viewer or as a user, but mostly as a viewer, because I'm a filmmaker and I guess I'm a talker.
Get at it. Maybe it comes with being Italian.
I'm genetically predisposed to podcasting, I think, because of that.
Yeah, you got the look and everything, man. Can you tell us a little bit about what are your recommendations as far as schools or raising children, being a good father, that sort of thing?
So, gosh, there's a lot. So my first recommendation is have kids way sooner than you think.
Nice, dude. Great recommendation.
So I was lucky, right? I'm glad you appreciate that, because it's now like countercultural.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, but
Wait, aren't you supposed to raise a dog for 10 years first and then
that's right.
think
That's right.
about having kids?
You're supposed to treat your dog like a person until you're in your late 30s and then contemplate whether you should have kids. That's wrong. That's toxic. I frankly, my son was an accident, and so the most beautiful, miraculous accident ever. I'm not. I'm gonna be 47. I have a 19-year-old son. Historical standards would put that on having a kid pretty old, but modern standards, that's like right in the median / young. So most of my peers' kids are much younger than my son. My dad had me. My dad was 23 when I was born. So one of the benefits of having kids early is they get to have a relationship with your parents for a much longer period of time, which is a real wonderful thing. My grandfathers and grandmothers, but especially my mom's dad, was a hugely important part of my childhood. So I think that's really important. I think that we end up becoming ironically worse equipped to give kids what they need as we get older. And what I mean by that is when you're young and in your 20s and you're kind of stupid and you sort of feel like a kid yourself, the messiness, the relatively low income, these are costs that are also now benefits, because the problem of modern parenting today is everybody is obsessed. We have fewer kids than we used to as a society. And we pour way more resources than we used to, or that we should, on our kids. We pack our schedules and stress ourselves out for no damn reason, because most of what kids need is presence and love and a lot of room to play in a self-directed way.
That's presence as in being present, not giving
Being
them
present. Being
presents.
present. Yes.
Because that
Not
is
presence
actually
as
the
in Christmas
opposite.
or Hanukkah, or presence as in being together, knowing you're there, knowing that you've got their back, but not actually having their back in each and every instance. So there's a certain. I'm very much a believer in free range parenting, letting your kids get hurt physically and emotionally. Obviously not fatally, but let them climb trees. Let them do hard things that might break a bone. Let them go out into the world as young as 8 or 9 years old, marginally or unattended. If you live in a safe neighborhood that makes that possible, which is still mostly true for most people in America, that most neighborhoods are safe enough that you could let your 9-year-old walk down the street to the gas station or the grocery store, and they're gonna come home just fine. There's a lot of misconceptions around that. People being worried about your kids getting kidnapped. It's like almost, first of all, very few kids get kidnapped. And the kids that do get kidnapped generally get kidnapped by a parent because it's a function of a marital dispute. So the likelihood that you send telling your 9-year-old run to the gas station down the street and buy yourself a Snickers bar, they are it's far more dangerous for you to drive them to school in your car than for them to walk down the street to the gas station or the grocery store and get a Snickers. And so you have to practice these things, because everything in our culture tells us to do the opposite, and our peers tell us to do the opposite, and our laws sometimes tell us to do the opposite. So some busybody calls child protective services on you because they see your 9-year-old walking down the street to get a Snickers bar, and now you have to contend with nonsense. But we have to fight against that, and we have to adopt this philosophy that essentially was the unthinking nature of reality for every generation until right now. Like, it was just taken for granted that by and large 9-year-olds would be running around like wolves outside until the sun went down. And now it's like now everything's a play date, everything's scheduled. I've got to drive you from here to there to everywhere. And then, I'm so stressed out. It's like, well, you're doing it to yourself. You don't need to do that. And then I think a couple other things, get married first. Simple fact. Kids do better with mom and dad. It's about as well established a fact as anything in social science. And be on the same page with your spouse about everything. Like, decide behind closed doors, how are we going to handle discipline? How are we going to handle X, Y, and Z? And present a united front. Keep it simple. Don't overreact. Don't make threats that you won't follow through on, because kids are really smart. So if you say, if you do that one more time, I'm going to take away TV for a month, or I'm going to take away your iPad for the rest of the year, you're not going to do that. Don't say it, because when you say a thing and then you don't follow through, you lose the respect of your kid, and you undermine your credibility, and you undermine their understanding of the way the world works. This is like all kind of common sense stuff, but I think it ends up being very powerful. If you're like me and find sort of this woke identity obsession to be toxic and evil and destructive to kids, especially kids who might be targeted for this, who are different, don't put your kids in a school that'll do that to them. It's not good for them. And the best example I've got is young girls who self-identify as left of center have the worst mental health of any group. It's not a coincidence. So everything we do should be oriented around empowering individual agency and internal locus of control. The notion that your choices matter, that you have the ability to choose. That's the opposite of victimhood mentality. Victimhood mentality is you don't have choice. It's an external locus of control, as the psychologists like to say. And you're a victim of circumstance. You're a victim of the system or the patriarchy or blah, 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 blah. That's all basically a recipe for mental health decline. And we need to reject it, and we need to avoid it at all costs as parents. And thinking we can put our kids into a school that's going to do that to them and have it not affect them is really being naive, because it's where they're going to spend a lot of their time. So that's a big thing about how to think about protecting your kids from some stuff that I think has become really toxic. And I don't say this lightly, but some of this I just think is evil. It's just evil to tell someone that they can't do it. I don't accept it as simply being misinformed. I think if your job is to try to lift people up, to teach people, and instead you tell them why they can't do things, that's villainy. I think we have to look that in the face and see it for what it is.
That was a great spiel, man. I hope everyone can hear that. That was awesome. So have you faced any adversity specifically because of your values? Because I think that is a fear that holds people back from helping others in the way that you're doing. And part of the mission of this podcast is to inspire people to take that risk so we can further the common good.
So that's a good question. When I first got out of, so I've always been sort of, you could say, conservative oriented. It's been when I was younger. Conservative as a label. All these political labels are kind of broken. So I would say I'm conservative in the sense that there's certain things I want to conserve, like America's most important founding principles and the classical virtues that have underpinned civilization, but certainly Western civilization, but not just Western. Family, faith, responsibility, pluralism, accepting others, being willing to live in a society in which not everyone likes and wants to do the things you want to, and that you're okay with that. We have to be able to do that. We have to be able to live in a pluralistic society. So these are things I want to conserve. When I got out of school, I worked in New York City at MTV and then Nickelodeon and then at Spike. And I kept my, at that point, fairly underdeveloped kind of Alex P. Keaton Republicanism to myself, because no one that worked with me raised their hand and be like, oh yeah, I'm voting for George W. Bush. Like nobody in my peer group in my career was vocally doing that. So I could say, like, during those early stages, I kept my politics to myself. I haven't had any kind of like cancel moment, but maybe I've also gotten more vocal at the same time I've become an entrepreneur. So I'm sort of working for myself. So good luck trying to cancel me. Like I'm uncancelable. Like, what are you going to do? Like, just don't watch. Like, if you think I'm a jerk, that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. I don't care. It's fine. If you have a point, I will concede it. If you catch me saying something that's inappropriate or that I should be regretful about, I'm not afraid to be like, yeah, I went too far on that. I think we need courage. And I think courage, I'm not saying I'm being courageous, but I think the path to courage and to not letting cancel culture be a thing for you is not tying your own identity to things that are unstable, like your job, or like your political views, which should be able to adapt and change Not all of them. Some of them better be pretty well grounded, but there's plenty of things where you should be open-minded and say, I'm open to hearing the other side. Even the things that you really care about the most, you should at least be willing to hear the other perspective and try to understand it as if you're that person. I think it's such an important part of the uniqueness of the human experience that we are capable of that at all. Animals can't do that. No other animal, I should say. We're the one animal that seems capable of that, of empathy, of understanding. And so I can't say I've had, I guess I haven't, I'm not enough of a entity for anybody to care. I think it's like, who cares what Papola has to say? Maybe that'll change someday. I hope it kind of doesn't in a way. I don't know. That's a rambling answer, but it's the truth.
So you said we shouldn't tie our identity to something that can change. What should we tie our identity to?
I mean, I personally believe that for me, the things that are ground my identity are my family history, my heritage to some extent, for sure. I care about my Italian heritage. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It is not to the detriment of anybody else. It's part of who I am. I like to understand that. Being a father is an absolutely cornerstone. Being a husband is a cornerstone. Being a son and a good son is a cornerstone. I'm Catholic, and that matters a lot to me. Being Catholic, my faith, my belief in Christ, and in all of the claims that for non-Christians sound like crazy talk, like his resurrection and the Eucharist becoming his body and blood, which sounds like some weird necromancy. It's like, well, I care about these things. I believe them to be claims that are true. So everyone's got to go on their own journey on that. But these are the things that matter to me. These are the things that are immovable. Although even in their immovability, especially around faith, I think we're called in faith to use reason and to be forever questioning. It's part of what I like about my faith as a Catholic, is that the tradition of Catholicism actually has a powerfully rich, intellectual, rigorous tradition. People like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, and so I like that. I'm an intellectual person, but ideas beyond those core virtues of goodness and they're up for grabs. I'm willing to hear out and be persuaded of a thing, if you can make the strong enough argument.
Yeah, what stood out to me in your identity is relationships, and I think that's absolutely right. The loving relationships in our lives. That's how we identify, which actually is extremely profound, given that the highest reality, the Trinity, is a set of subsistent relations. So our identity reflects the Trinity of God in that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it's I'm coming back to a faith I inherited by birth and just by being like I'm 100. My whole family lineage is Italian, all like South Philadelphia, so I naturally just went to Catholic school. So I'm now in my mid 40s, sort of rediscovering the theology and the philosophy of Catholicism. It's like I have like this I have this like childlike wonder about these things that I sort of went through theology class as a kid, and now I'm confirmed, and okay, now I'm done. And now I'm coming back to these things, and something like the Trinity, as you said, is so powerful. The notion that like there's a fundamental existential reality about love being relational, that like love definitionally, like archetypally, is about in relation, which maybe sounds like obvious, but I think it makes sense that love in the abstract, love, like if there's just a singular thing, if there's just a dot, why would you have love? Love of what? Yourself? So that it's powerful. I think it's what makes the loneliness in our society so truly, literally heartbreaking, because, and I am as free market capitalist as they come, but I think one of the challenges that comes with the dynamism of a free enterprise oriented society is we can become more atomized. We can be individualistic in a way that is not about rights, but is about lifestyle and about relationships. So that's something that some of that's natural. You're young, you go off to school, you get a job, or you move to a city to get a job because you're pursuing a career, and that's all good. I did that. But then as you get older and as you find a spouse and as you want to plant roots, having the roots be something that's spread and that are connected to others is the way you thrive. In the absence of that, you're just a seed that's been cast into the stones and has nowhere to take root.
Do you want to end with just sharing with us some of the exciting projects you have on the horizon and how people, where you recommend people follow you or where they get started in looking at your work?
Oh, I appreciate it. So you should definitely go to dadssavesamerica.com if you like any of this and think I'm not a complete crank.
You're a little bit of a crank, but it's in a good way. It adds to it. It
I
adds to
appreciate the honesty, brother. I'm definitely a little bit cranky from time to time. I'm not gonna pretend I'm not.
You're gonna be a great grandfather.
Boy, that's true. You know, yeah. Grandpa, not everything's communism. No, no, no. Look closer. It's already happening. It's already there. Uh, um, the easiest place to check out what we're doing is on youtube.com/dadssavesamerica. That's our YouTube channel. If you want to really like not be completely subject to the YouTube algorithm, you can sign up at dadsavesamerica.com to get the newsletter, which has the episodes and everything in it. It's via Substack. We've got some exciting thing coming down the pike. We've got a big multi-part video essay about the history of public education that I'm really excited about.
Interesting.
And that's so we're always talking about education on the show, so that's a big thing. We've also got a film in the works about what's happening to debate, particularly in high school. And it's an expose type of film, but it's one that I think, again, as a parent, is really important because if you care about the quality of discourse in this country, you need to understand why and how things are going off the rails and how early some of the kids that are set up to be our future leaders are being introduced to the concept of making arguments from different sides, because it's actually quite shocking. There is a positive, happy story in there of kids that are doing amazing things, but there's also a lot to expose about things that have been corrupted. And I think the last thing would be, we are producing these new rap battles, again, speaking about debate and discourse, that take on big ideas and steel man both sides of the argument. So even the people who I would strongly disagree with, I actually put a lot of time into understanding and articulating their strongest version. You can see the ones that have already been done, Keynes versus Hayek, at youtube.com/@radical discourse. The new one is on immigration, and it'll be coming out probably at the beginning of next year. These are crazy high-end productions. They take a long time to make. It's original music. We shot it on this big set in Atlanta where they do like Disney movies and stuff. So super crazy. Our goal is for people to watch this and say, why would anyone do this? Like, why did you do this? This is insane. Like, why would you do this? All of that comes together on our main organization website, which is eo.foundation. So you can see a link to all that stuff on eo.foundation.
That's exciting. I look forward to checking that out. And thanks for what you do, man. I really appreciate it. The fact that you're doing very, very high quality work with the values you have, the witness to the truth. We need more people like that, and I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you having me on and letting me run my mouth endlessly, which I am inclined to do if given the opportunity.
I wish we could do more of it, man. You had some great spiels there. I just want keep preaching.
Yeah, there's another world in which I'm probably like a priest or something. So I'm endeavoring to be a kind of preacher. That is for sure. I won't shy away from that.
Well, would that all the people of the Godhead prophecy. Take care,
I
John.
appreciate it.